All right, English teacher friends, coming to you with another Hammer and Home the Thesis writing workshop in which we use classic TV commercials to solidify writing introductions for the FRQ2 featured on the AP Language and Composition exam. So this is a fantastic commercial, especially if your students are familiar with 1984, with Orwell's 1984. The commercial has a fantastic allusion to it, to the concept of Big Brother, the dystopian quality. So my students have read that with me, so they were all over the allusion in this. So to find the video, just type in first home computer commercial 1984 and you'll get the Macintosh Apple version of that. It's free on YouTube. Pretty fascinating commercial and prophetic in many ways in terms of what the internet and the World Wide Web has, how that's evolved since 1984. It's kind of mind blowing because I was 9 years old when the first home computers came out, and I remember I got a Commodore 64 on my 10th birthday. I was pretty stoked about that. So this is very nostalgic for me. So one of the things we do in terms of doing this is I teach on the block, and oftentimes I'll have a class where we just are exclusively going to focus on manipulating the strings of my introductory templates, so the templates we use to house the thesis, but then practice reading. So ultimately, when students read, they're answering two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? And we're going to dive into that very deep in this writing workshop in just a second. But you can do that visually with commercials. And just to break the, mundane nature of day in, day out instruction, I like to use these commercials. And students actually come in on a lot of days and they're like, Mr. Kuhn, can we watch commercials? And they give me commercials that I make writing workshops around. So it's very, very cool. So one of the things I always say is please Bob Ross your instruction when you teach. And what I mean by that is there is an absolute fundamental difference between the assigning of writing and the explicit direct teaching of it. So imagine Bob Ross comes onto the screen and says, all right, happy little people, today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape, beautiful fall foliage, and in the center of our canvas, we're going to include an old rickety New England wood-covered bridge. And then he passes out a graphic organizer and says, all right, have at it. Go ahead. You got 2 class periods to do it. Right? We would not be good painters, right? We would not learn a lick about painting if Bob Ross taught that way. When we assume that Bob Ross persona, we get to the proverbial canvas and easel and we paint with our students. We show them explicitly how to do it. But the kicker, you got to use templates. Bob Ross always used a template called the wet on wet technique whenever he did nature painting. And whenever I do expository writing with my students, whether it be rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research, we always use the same templates of the declarative inverted thesis and the syllogistic method for the body paragraphs. So let's jump right in. The question immediately is this: how in the world do we write introductory paragraphs based on, that have us, doing rhetorical analysis? And the answer is this: you only got 2 choices. You can declare the thesis or invert. But hold tight. Those of you that are familiar with my work know that we are going to declare the thesis because we are writing rhetorical analysis. So we do inverted thesis for literary analysis, declarative thesis for rhetorical analysis, and then it's a 50-50 coin flip between argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research. You can either declare or invert. It's usually contingent upon the prompt, and there's a bunch of stuff in my YouTube channel that goes over that, especially for the Lang teachers that are curious about how to do FRQ1 and FRQ3. Ton of stuff in there, and FRQ1 and FRQ3, you got a choice, declare or invert. But for rhetorical analysis, we just declare. So implicit in any prompt, right? If I were to write a million prompts that have my students anchored in the task of writing rhetorical analysis, and the same is true for literary analysis, No matter the prompt, I'm ultimately asking this, and this is true of the College Board. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So when we declare, what we're going to do is find the three most salient terms, the three most germane terms in the commercial, and put them into our question, into our answer of the question, how does the author construct meaning? You have to use your terms, devices, techniques. Authorial intent is just getting sort of at like universal truth, universal theme. Exigence is what some teachers call it. So here's how this boils down. When you declare the thesis, you start by answering this question. How does the author construct meaning? That's the thesis. Whenever you're answering that question, that's the thesis. So we're going to declare this. Out of the gate, just boom, drop the thesis, declare it. So how does the author construct meaning? From there, you got to sprinkle in some context and background without being plot summative. And it's three sentences. How does the author construct meaning? One sentence. What is the authorial intent? But there's more to it than that. So my students have intensive word study with me. I run something from September to June when they leave me called the Word Study Academy. And my students have some big vocabs because I know when they come to me, most of them have a massive gaping vocabulary void because they're not reading text-rich stuff much at all. So to fill that void, I do a word study academy, which is this whole arsenal of strategies I have to augment their vocabularies. So pay attention to my students' vocabulary in this. They are in their wheelhouse, but they're going to cop a certain academic tone with a little bit of colloquial and vernacular swagger in there as well, because you don't want to totally geek out and sound contrived or pedantic. They're definitely going to stay in their wheelhouse, but they got a certain pizzazz and flair to it. That's nice. Tier 2 simply means your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. I also run throughout the course of my academic career or year, and with my professional development opportunities that I host with the National Writing Project, we do a deep dive into what I call the Nuance Academy. So I teach all the basics with my students: grammar, punctuation, syntax, voice rhythm, and flow. Go over it all intensively. And I borrow something that is known as rule number 18. And it comes from Strunk and White in their seminal text called Write It Right. Rule number 18 asserts that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you're going to see my students pull some punches with their syntax. In order to get that voice, rhythm, and flow that's so essential to sophistication, you're going to see my students do some pretty tricky things with their sentence constructs. My big piece of advice is this to them: don't parallel your sentences. Struggling and emerging writers typically go independent clause, independent clause, independent clause, independent clause, and they're done. So just an over reliance on the short, simple declarative sentence. So my students have great alacrity with their sentences. They're very supple and they flow, and they know the effect and the purpose of each sentence. They know their parts of speech. And it's really important to know all of that stuff so that they make full, good level-headed choices as writers as they're laying down their sentences. So pay attention to their vocab, pay attention to their sentence constructs, and it's always going to be 4 sentences long. So let's go back here. 3 sentences. How does the author construct meaning? You lead with that, so you're going to declare. 1 sentence. What is the authorial intent? All right. And then for the inverted, I have other videos in my YouTube channel that go into literary analysis in much, much depth. But I'm doing rhetorical analysis right now, so I'm going to skip that. So let's take a look at student number 1, right? Ideally, what they have to do is choose the 3 most salient, germane, surefire terms, devices, techniques from the list that we have in my room. So this is a poster that I have in my room, and we just add to it. It's a Velcro poster. So they've seen all of these words at the time of seeing this 1984 Apple Macintosh commercial. So look where my student went with this. This is student number 1. Playing upon Orwell's bleak forecast for 1984, Apple suggests that its first home computer can reverse this dystopic state of affairs. Right? So you start with the illusion. That's the whole thing. That's the exigence. That's the universal truth right there. That illusion is what drives the commercial. While the narrator inaudibly mutters the word one to signify the horrors of mass mind control, this product promises an unfettered gateway to intellectual freedom. Juxtaposing the draconian measures of a society overseen by Big Brother, Apple suggests that the information superhighway is poised to deliver nothing but the promises of utopia. Apple, knowing that America is a nation built on the polar opposite principles of 1984, appeals to those individuals looking to hold fast to their intellectual and personal liberties. There it is. So you got the illusions, you got the ethos, the logos, the pathos, right? Even mentioned the juxtaposition in here. So usually you focus on the 3 most salient terms, devices, techniques, slip in the authorial intent, always 3 plus 1. The vocab's up in this. This kid can write bleak, inaudibly, dystopic, great words in here. But there's also this bit of colloquial vernacular like information superhighway, promises of utopia, polar opposite. So they don't totally geek out on this, but also note the sentence constructs are also very supple. Right? Nothing parallels. They're all very good. A couple parenthetical statements in there, some adjective clauses, all very, very good. Out of the gate, I think any AP reader would read this and say, wow, if this kid can sustain this for the duration of this paper, I'm definitely giving them the sophistication point. And it's all a package. It's the Nuance Academy, it's the Word Study Academy, but they have to be able to read correctly. And that's the glory of using templates. The writing gets demystified because you were using templates. It's the same thing every time, 3 plus 1. And then all we really need to do is work on the reads. And students, are able to do that pretty well with practice, practice, practice. So here's student number 2. Drawing a stark allusion to Orwell's 1984. So you see that? Lead with the most prominent. Apple suggests that the actual arrival of the year 1984 and the first home computer is going to reverse the course of how history unfolds. Instead of Big Brother seizing control of personal freedom, the personal computer is going to grant each individual their rights to liberty. Conversely, instead of fulfilling Orwell's bleak vision for this particular year, Apple suggests that their product can promise a more utopic version of history. In a country where one's freedoms are sacred and fought for, Apple implies that their home computer not only preserves and extends intellectual freedom, but a vast opportunity for individuals to revel in their God-given autonomy. It's the exact same thing as the first one in terms of following the template. 3 terms, devices, techniques, 1 sentence authorial intent, total of 4 sentences. Flex those sentence constructs, flex that tier 2. And out of the gate, it's pizzazz every single time. Students can do this. And I'm showing some of my better writers, but this is what kids are capable of with some direct teaching, a little Bob Rossing, some templates, and very focused study on composition. Here's student number 3. Again, we're going to do 3 plus 1. Instead of the dystopic scenario of mass mind control and the government seizure of liberty that Orwell foretold, the first home computer is going to reverse fate and create a veritable utopia in the year 1984. Man will not be a blind sheep following blindly to the decrees of the man. Conversely, Apple suggests that its home computer is going to open the floodgates to liberty, freedom, and intellectual promise. Like the woman with the sledgehammer, Apple is going to bust apart the government and social apparatus that wants to rear a nation of mindless lemmings. And that's the whole thing. That's the exigence, is that the home computer, this particular Apple computer, is going to open up the information superhighway, and that's the ticket to freedom. So rhetorically, what did Apple use? What did they employ? What did they manipulate in order to convey that message? 3 plus 1, right? So vocab's up, sentence construct supple. It's all very good. So every single student does the exact same thing in terms of their execution of this. And it's a great way to house a thesis and come out of the gates with blazing speed. So if you would like access to those slides, feel free to email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I'll pass them your way. Also note that going forward, all of my professional development offerings are going to be hosted through the National Writing Project. We got a whole bunch of cool stuff on Slate. So we're offering my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind several times throughout the course of the academic and summer calendar. And I have a self-paced course every month. We are doing these little one-off spin-offs. I've done alternative grading methods, my Plato's Plato discussion modality, Nuance Academy, Word Study Academy, the work I've done with Strunk and White, teaching line of reasoning. So every month we have a little one-off. So if you're interested in doing some PD and really expanding your breadth as a composition instructor, then check out my webpage at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. Be well, happy teaching, happy writing.